founder or an entrepreneur. You wanna take your company value to 300 million, we gon' show you how to do it. But we got the roadmap, the aspirations. We'll give you a game plan and strategies. Seize control of your company's destiny today by tuning in to Private Capital Mastery. Let's start the show.
Welcome back to the Private Capital Mastery Podcast. I'm Brian Franco, and today we're going to be unpacking details on how to take your business from $10 to $30 million and beyond. I have a guest here today, a good friend of mine, Nick Long. We've done some work together over the years, and he's going to share his experiences as a serial entrepreneur and and specifically the businesses that he's owned over the years and he's scaled and grown for purposes of exiting. So welcome, Nick, for being here with us.
Brother Franco, this is kind of fun, dude.
Good to see you, man.
Yeah, this looks great. I'm so impressed with this studio and the setup, and I'm actually just stoked that you're finally getting the message out to the marketplace.
Yes.
It's a message that needs to get out there to all the entrepreneurs.
It does. And actually, you know, in the first episodes, just framing what we're going to be doing, what we're going to be talking about, the response has been, we need this. No one is doing this. Like, please give us more, give us more.
Right. I mean, that kind of case in point, there wasn't a you doing this when I was a me doing what I was doing. Yeah. Right. And it would have been, you know, it would have been very, very helpful to be able to kind of digest this. And as I was going through my own gestation, you know, as an entrepreneur and scaling. Yeah.
I mean, and you know, I know the story because we've talked many times. Yeah. And so, you know, what we're trying to do and what we've been doing with the podcast is educating entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs, provoking thought in them, you know, wherever they are on their journey. Some of those, you know, we've even had it on the show as guests. They've been growing and scaling their business. They've been doing it with friends and family capital. They've been doing it with institutional capital. Some have had private equity groups in there.
Right.
And the hardest part is that as an entrepreneur, and you and I can relate to this, is that how and when do you say yes to those transaction opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And I know you could probably spend the next 2 days telling a story.
How much time?
Yeah.
No, you saw my eyes when you said friends and family. I'm like, oh, like, I mean, a lot of people do go down that path of friends and family, and it's great, but it also comes with a lot of weight. But like understanding, you know, something you and I have talked about is that transaction trigger.
Yes.
And then being super clear on what that transaction trigger is, and then how much you should transact for at the time of that trigger. You know, so I mean, you know, I've seen, you know, your shows, and you've had like even like a guy like Russ Perry on here, right? Yeah. Which he's like a brilliant entrepreneur.
Yeah.
He held out. And good for him, he did. Yeah. But what people don't understand is that the holding out came with the holding on to a lot of the weight. But it's like letting go of one weight and picking up another. So it's not like all your problems are solved. Like once you get a capital injection, or even if you get an exit, like you actually create a different level of weight that you're now having to carry and process. Yeah.
And if you define problems as challenges, right, the mindset and the challenges you have as a startup entrepreneur versus, let's say, a company that you're scaling beyond 10 million of revenue, right, or a company that you might even be taking public via an IPO, the challenges are different. The mindset's going to be different, right? And to know, and this is self-awareness, right, because we haven't even really started talking about the business yet. We're talking about
the businessman.
The businessman, right?
It's always the businessman.
Always a businessman.
The business plan is actually relatively easy, right? But the businessman, as you and I both know, in painful real life experience, is the complex part. And I've been that guy. I've been that businessman that wasn't aware. And it's not even, God, awareness is part of it, but I think it's just educated. That's why I think this podcast and what you're doing and the message you're bringing to the marketplace is being so well received because nobody's talking about it.
No.
Like and there's this big chasm of like, you see people that you want to emulate. You see the Elons of the world. You see all these people. You're like, how? Yeah. Like, how did they do that? Well, they followed a playbook, which is the playbook that, you know, you're kind of opening up and revealing.
Smart capital, right?
Smart capital,
And that comes primarily from the private capital markets.
Right.
Could be private equity groups, could be family
offices,
offices,
venture,
mezz groups, venture groups, right? And I always say, yes, you could raise money from friends and family if you no longer want friends and family, right? And so it's like, all right, there's other options there.
The friends and family reminds me of the thing that you and I always say is like, partnerships, are difficult, right? Difficult enough because the only ship that doesn't really float is a partnership.
Yeah.
And if you're bringing your family into that partnership, you're actually penetrating that wall, and it gets very convoluted.
It is.
You know?
Yeah, you show up at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you say? Hi, or do you say, hey, the business is doing X?
Exactly.
Right?
And nobody wants to talk about it, but everybody wants to talk about it.
The elephant.
But so I highly encourage entrepreneurs to be the bootstrap person as long as they can, but as short as they can. And what that means is like do it for as long as you can to where it's costing you more by not doing it. But you got to get it to a place where you can at least go beyond the network of friends and family and at least go into some angel round or somebody that's a high net worth individual, a former entrepreneur, a current entrepreneur that understands like who you are, because chances are your friends and family, they don't, or else they'd be you.
They're capital, right? But that's about it, right? It's almost just like a loan, right? From an institutional bank. They're not there to help you. They're there to say, remind you to pay them, yes, but they're not going to tell you, hey, here's a faster way you could grow your business so you could pay us off faster.
Right.
They're not going to tell you.
No, they're like, hey, Brian, this is a cute little company you got. We believe in you. Here you go.
Yeah.
And even though they hand it over and they say they believe in you, in the back of their mind, they're still like, man, what if this doesn't work, right? And where a seasoned entrepreneur or seasoned investor or an institutional investor or someone that's a serial investor, they're going to kind of go into it knowing that 100% of their capital is at risk, right? And that just comes with a different, mentality and energy, right? Thanksgiving dinner, or thankful that you're hitting the numbers that you said you're going to hit.
Yeah, we're working on a deal at the moment where it's a founder who's looking to acquire and operate a business that he intends to grow and scale through both organic methods and acquisitions, right? And smart man. I mean, Harvard graduate, backed by family office.
Nice.
But to that point, in the negotiations of this transaction, because of that experience, I know I'm not just negotiating with him.
Right.
I'm negotiating alongside with his partners, our capital partners. But it's going to collapse time for this young man, right? Who is, I mean, he's when it comes to education, he's a star athlete, right? To go and put this man into a business to grow and scale. I mean, the investors are going to do great. But to the point you made earlier, like those loan documents are so long, is not because it's always the clawbacks that the banks are going to have when you think about institutional
They're not thinking
loans.
about all the upside.
Yeah.
They're thinking about all the downside. And there's a downside with all of this.
There's risk.
Yeah, there's a downside with
Calculated risk,
with all of this, right? And when you look at that particular situation, capital is actually not backing the business that he's buying. Of course, they're going to approve whatever business he buys. But who are they backing? They're backing the jockey, not the horse.
That's right.
And it's the businessman over the business plan. And then the proper capitalization in the hands of the right businessman, game over. Like, because the business plan can be fixed.
Yeah.
And
it's evident because even our client on the south side of the equation, they're looking at this gentleman and they're saying,
I like him.
I actually not only like him, I want to roll equity forward. I want that second bite of the apple.
So they're betting on him too.
They're betting on him too.
They're taking a little parlay on that. Yeah, see, and that's the whole thing. But without the capital partner, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about that example that you just talked about, it's the triangulation of all three things: the right businessman, the right business plan, and then the right capital partner to accelerate all of that.
All of it.
Right? And so you got everybody coming together going, hey, we've gotten this to a certain point. Like, we want to roll equity onto you. You're obviously highly educated. You're successful. And then, oh my gosh, you got this smart money behind you.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't want to take as many chips off the table.
Yeah.
I want to leave a few in the kitty because I know that what you're going to do when it gets down to the nitty gritty, right?
Yeah.
So
it's that second bite of the apple.
And that's what
about.
I mean. If anybody is contemplating taking capital, I'd say go take a long look in the mirror and ask yourself: Are you investable? Like, park your business, whether it's dog walking or it's sending rockets to the moon. Like, look at yourself and say, am I investable? Am I a person that I would invest in? Knowing your habits, your patterns, your beliefs, like how you show up.
Yes.
Because that's energetically what you're transferring when you're walking into these meetings with the capital partners.
100%.
You know?
100%, right? We just had an episode where we were talking about that, and character. Character is a big topic because this guest that we had, Maria, she actually co-founded several companies, one of which went on to be public.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, the common denominator between all of the companies that she co-founded was that she was always protecting the character and how she showed up, right? And because what happened is the common denominator was actually, yes, her character, but the investors investing in her because of her character. Right? And how she showed up.
Right.
And she may have not been able to start, I don't know the details, but let's just say, you know, extreme scenario where no one may have invested in her if she didn't have that character.
100%. I mean, you've invested in companies, I've invested in companies.
Yes.
And it's always like, okay, that sounds cool, but
Yeah. Who's doing it?
I believe you're going to do it, or I don't believe you're going to do it. So you either invest based upon that. You know, we invest on emotion based in logic, right? And a lot of investors say, "Oh, that's so wrong. We always invest in logic." It's like, not really. There's an emotional attachment to it because, like, you're using the logic to amplify your emotion, and you're using your emotions to, you know, backfill the logic with the entrepreneur. You know, So I mean, that's why, you know, like the conversations that you have with people are priceless because you can kind of come at it from both lens. You know,
absolutely.
Like you straddle both sides.
Yeah, and so in your journey as an entrepreneur,
Jesus, a journey it's been.
you founded several companies. You know, I think, you know, you and I were talking about one of those case studies because these case studies, you know, really help illustrate, you know, not who you are, but what you've been through. And what you've been through, you've gained knowledge and wisdom. And so what I love to offer anyone listening or tuning in is to access those nuggets of information, right? So can you share a bit about?
Geez, I could share a lot. So it's cool. I think it's YPO. They use something called the Gestalt method, and the Gestalt method is like when you're sitting around a table with the other guys in YPO, and you have to have certain accreditations and things like that to be there.
That's right.
They don't say, Brian, you should do this, right? They go, Brian, what happened to me is, and then they share from experience because that's actually the greatest teacher in life is actually sharing from experience.
Almost like in parables, right?
Right.
We learn most from parables.
Religions were built in storytelling in parables, right? So I'm going to not tell a parable. I'm going to tell an actual like fiction, you know, or nonfiction story here about my own journey. Is that like I was the bootstrap bandit? You know, my wife and I started a company that you're referencing with 2 cell phones, $75,000 in debt, and a big ass why. And that why was we had to pay for our own wedding. I had to replace the cubic zirconia with a real diamond, and I told her I would, and I did before I said I do. And we had to pay for our honeymoon, and we wanted to build this business, right? So we had this big ass why, and we were bootstrapping this thing. We bootstrapped it, and I proliferated the profits, and people were like, "Oh my God, you're doing 7 million, doing 8 million, doing 10 million. You must be making a lot of money." I was like, "Well, the company itself is making money. I myself am not because I'm taking all of those profits and I'm proliferating them forward. I didn't have a capital backstop. I didn't have a capital partner. To such point where someone came and they said, "Hey, you should take on private equity." And I'm like, what is that? You know? And I thought it was like a private investigator or something. I was like, I don't need anybody looking into my life. And so they said, this is how it works. And a friend of mine had just gone through something, and he got like $5 million, and he was able to take a couple million off the table. I'm like, yes, please. I'm so thirsty to actually access, or as I think you say, harvest the wealth that sits in my business.
Yes.
Like I would love to do that. So I hired a number of advisors, and some of them were great, but not all of them. And so one is I had too many cooks in the kitchen. And so, you know, if I get a chef from Argentina, a chef from France, and a chef from Canada, you know, like I'm going to be confused because they're all going to come with their own kind of lens and their own Gestalt method and history of how they've done it. And so I couldn't make heads or tails of it. But what ultimately ended up happening was I should have gotten an advisor that was like very specific to my need, right? And I needed to fully understand my need. And so before you can be the conduit to capital, you have to be the conduit to clarity, right? And so I needed to get really clear. So ultimately what ended up happening, and I'll share it with the listeners, is that I went on 50 first dates. I spent a whole year of my life. I spent several $100,000 kissing a bunch of frogs. And I'd walk into these rooms with private equity, very pedigreed people, buttoned up with their Patagonia vests and their Harvard education and their Ivy League, acumens, and it was awesome. And they were very impressed because I had gotten to this level of multiple 8 figures on my own.
Correct.
100% owned 100% of the company, never diluted it, no debt. Like it was, they're like, wow. And so every time the conversation was, Nick, you should be very proud of yourself. You built a very big business, blah, blah, blah. And then they'd say, but it's not a fit for us. And I didn't understand, and no one was explaining to me
what the fit was.
Because if, as an entrepreneur, would you say we look at problems as challenges?
Yeah, challenges.
If I knew what the challenge was and I knew what the outcome was, I would have put in the input to go from being challenged to conquer.
And it is the vision of this podcast, is to give everyone an insider's look as to how does the market perceive the business? How does the market perceive you?
Because they're entirely different than what maybe the marketplace, right? You have the market, as you refer to, as the private capital market. Then you have the marketplace, which is your customers and clients and employees. 2 entirely different perceptions. Different sometimes entrepreneurs can't wrap their head around it, and I certainly couldn't.
No.
But then I got to a point, as you know, where I could have transacted. And it would have been very, very meaningful, multiple 8 figures. But I didn't understand the deal details, right? I didn't understand that. And you taught me, quite viscerally, like, the valuation and the terms and the deal details all matter. And I didn't understand any of that. So I ultimately didn't take this deal. And so it was a multiple 8-figure deal, north of 30 million. The next year, I sold that business for 1.8 million, and it was a Hail Mary in the end zone, and I didn't see a freaking dime of that 1.8 million, And so had I been in the right framework, had I been with the right advisory team, and had I actually listened to, my
Intuition.
own clarity and intuition, man, it would be a much different situation, but we wouldn't be having this conversation.
We wouldn't be having this conversation, and that's the nugget of information that's so important, right, for founders and entrepreneurs, because because we have to look at the world in multiple dimensions, right? I mean, the business is one, right? The capital markets is another. And then, talk about, insurance and insurance renewals. That's a whole nother world you live in as an entrepreneur. But, the goal here is to provoke this thought and to educate folks and to share these case studies and stories, real life stories, right?
Yeah, because they are real.
Yeah, because our intentions are to really pay it forward and pay it forward in a way where, listen, go. We're rooting for you. We're cheering for you, but
do this, and this.
We'll tell you what to do, and we'll also tell you what not to do.
Yeah, well, like you say, see around corners and see through walls, and it's so important, So my encouragement to anybody that's listening is to reach out to Brian, to have a conversation with he and his team, allow him to just unpack what's on your mind, but then kind of place it where the market is, and tell you, like, hey, this is the path. And one of the things amongst many that I respect about you is, like, you won't take a deal just to take a deal, because at the end of the day, like, if you don't get paid unless they get paid. I mean, I know there's some fees and things along the way, but
there is. But our reputation. I mean, the truth is, I honestly, getting these deals done is as rewarding as the monetary benefit.
Yeah, no, and that's actually the reward, because
really
for you,
is.
like,
really
I've seen you celebrate these guys, and you actually took what they thought was impossible and made it not only probable, but you actually put it in practical.
You brought it to fruition.
Exactly. Like that's it. So I know that a lot of entrepreneurs out there are, like, wondering, can I sell my business? The answer is 100% yes, but it's probably 100% not right now. And that's why you need to continue to dive into the podcast like this, to reach out to Brian and his team, and to speak with them, because they can kind of guide you on that journey, not on the things that worked, but actually educate you on the things that didn't work, because you're likely doing a lot of them right here, right now, because I know I was.
Well, I'll tell you, in the time that we spend here, I know we can spend hours and hours, but your shirt says 90. It stands for Next 90. It's a lot of the coaching and advisory work that you do. But it's funny because when we do exit planning, we take that in 90-day stints.
That's
right?
how you have to do it.
90-day stints. It doesn't have to be, well, in 5 years, I want to be here. No. Well, if you want to be there in 5 years, where are you going to be in 3 months from now? Right.
Yeah. And you should be looking 5 years down the road, but then reverse engineer it to a year, break that down into the next 90 and chase the next 90. That's why I call my brand the next 90, because I'm coaching people through the next 90 days of their life. And people grossly underestimate like what they can actually get done with a very laser-like focus in 90 days. You know,
accountability.
100%.
Well, Nick, thanks for being on, and
man,
I'd love to have you on again. And
let's do it. This studio, I could live here, man. This is great.
Well, no, really, thanks for being, and we'll come up with other subjects because there's a lot that we've talked about.
I've got a lot of them. You know that.
And we do a lot of work together, and we're always there for the common goal of the client and to achieve what they. I was going to say achieve what they expect, but sometimes we achieve what they never expected, right?
Yeah. And show
That's
them
pretty
what's
crazy,
possible.
yeah. And thank you for joining this episode of Private Capital Mastery, where we continue to provoke thought and educate founders, entrepreneurs, and CEOs just like you. We encourage you to join us next week on Tuesday as we unpack more details. Until then, have a wonderful week. I'm Brian Franco. Take care.
See you later.